I want to talk about a very important issue. I saw, that Ben Shapiro, soll gesund sein. He should be well. He said something, that President Trump should stop saying that that the that the press is the enemy of the people. But then he said that, the press should stop thinking that President Trump is the enemy of the people. And I see the wisdom in what he's saying, but the thing is that, first of all, President Trump isn't saying that all the press is the enemy of the people. He's saying that the fake news is the enemy of the people. But I think there's something deeper here that we have to understand. A lot of people feel, especially people who are professional journalists or claim to be such, they feel that they are protected by the First Amendment, that the First Amendment puts them into a special class. Talk about the Fifth Estate, right? The Fourth Estate or the Fifth Estate, forget. That there's something special about them. And that they, the same thing, all of this upset about this journalist from Saudi Arabia who was most likely killed in Turkey by the Saudi government. And, the Saudi government does all kinds of horrible things, but, for various reasons, excuse me, various American presidents have overlooked that in favor of whatever needs to be for America and so forth. So all this being said, the media thinks, oh, but this guy, he's a journalist, he's in a special class, and so that's the mass media, and that's something special, so he is, this is like attacking some kind of a protected class. And it wasn't that long ago that it was really like just the opposite. There was more liberalism on the left, and today there isn't. And in general, we have to recognize, what does it mean, the freedom of the press? The freedom of the press, the emphasis is on freedom and not on the press. That the press is some kind of a new establishment that's a protected class. They're not supposed to be protected classes in America. They're not supposed to be classes in America. There's a prohibition in the Constitution against having, titles and, of royalty and so forth. We don't have dukes and lords and counts and, kings and queens and princes and princesses. And it's quite un-American the way that the press presents themselves as this, as being basically, we are some kind of a special class and it's our job to do these things because we are protected by this freedom of the press. It's just the opposite. The meaning of the term freedom of the press, I'll demonstrate it, will come once again to The Simpsons. Some years ago, there was an episode of The Simpsons where I believe Mr. Burns bought up all of the media organizations in Springfield, right? And then Lisa recognized that she had the access to the school newspaper printing press, and she could, distribute this paper not only to her schoolmates but to the whole city. And this would be the one last bit of the media in town that was independent from Mr. Burns. And Mr. Burns, the whole rest of the episode, was trying to squash Lisa's little newspaper. And in the end, everybody had their own newspaper, Lenny had the Lenny Saver, right? It's like the news about Carl. He's great, right? I think Patty and Selma had their own newspaper. Everybody had their own newspaper in the end. And Lisa realized, at first, she was also, wanted to protect her little empire that she had built. But then she realized that the freedom of the press means everybody. Meaning my YouTube channel here and whatever I write on Twitter or Facebook or on a blog, even if nobody watches it, nobody reads it, or a handful of people, not nobody, everybody is somebody, everybody watches, but I'm saying even the ones that nobody watches, but I think every one of my videos has at least one view, but they probably don't get this far. But I am, by doing this, engaging in what my constitutionally protected rights of freedom of the press, freedom of speech. Meaning, because when we say freedom of the press, this is media. It's social media, maybe. The fact of the matter is YouTube has the potential of being mass media. And so the freedom of the press means for everybody. It means, what's his name? InfoWars has just as much right of freedom of the press as CNN. Now, true, YouTube has the right to shut down, to say InfoWars, you're not on YouTube. And Twitter and Facebook, they all have the same right to ban Alex Jones from YouTube. Just because they have the right to do that doesn't mean they should do it. I don't think Farrakhan should be banned either. I don't think anybody should be banned unless, and the fact of the matter is, these things are valuable in the government interest when the bad things are going on at these places, because it brings it out in the open. Whatever this platform, Gab, I think it's called, it's supposed to be an alternative to Twitter and to the more popular social media. A lot of bad guys have gone on there. For the government or anybody to shut them down is idiotic, because now we have evidence there that will help in the prosecution of this Bowers guy, Ymach Shemo. That's there. So Gab, it didn't really help this Mr. Bowers in any way. It only hurt him and provided more evidence against him. He didn't have any followers. He didn't have, people who were, no, that didn't help him. That only hurt him. And so in a certain sense, it's positive, even though, I don't think Alex Jones is that dangerous. He's kind of goofy, he's kind of weird, it's entertaining in a certain way. And he sometimes brings up some interesting points that are worthwhile to consider. But the same thing, we should know what Farrakhan is saying. And so we shouldn't be banning Farrakhan, but we should also know what Alex Jones is saying and not be banning Alex Jones, although there's no comparison between Farrakhan and Alex Jones. Alex Jones is not a racist. He doesn't hate anybody. It's apples and oranges there. And he's not as dangerous. He doesn't have, violent followers the way that Farrakhan has, but Farrakhan, even his people have potential. I remember meeting. I've in my line of work, I've run into people from Nation of Islam. I never had problems with them. I treat them with respect, and they treat me with respect. We can respectfully disagree. That's fine. As long as we're not killing each other, as long as we're not hurting each other. And certainly I, in my professional standing, have to show everybody respect. And in a certain way, it'll open up our hearts to show who we are to everybody. That we're really not all that different. I'll end off with a very interesting story. I shared it. It's actually recorded on YouTube, but I remember it's quite strange to me, this whole this whole dialogue that went on. But when I served as a chaplain in a federal prison down south, when I was a Rav in the shul there, someone came up to me, and he was from the Nation of Islam. And we had a very pleasant conversation. I didn't even realize he was from Nation of Islam. And then he said something to me. He said that Dr. Martin Luther King, who you would think that's the enemy of Nation of Islam, right? That's the opposite of Farrakhan. He said Dr. King was the most Christ-like person of the 20th century. And I told it over once at a Martin Luther King event where I spoke. And I said, I hope I didn't mean to offend Christians by saying that, but, I think that's the goal of every Christian, is to emulate, the founder of their faith. That's something you wouldn't expect to hear. And something I heard with my own ears. And here we are, two people, not Christians, but thinking about a very famous pastor, Dr. King, and his contributions to society, and indeed there are many parallels there between him and the man that he sought to emulate. Why do these people always get into the right lane if they're not turning? So anyway, this guy at least is turning, Chach. Okay. But the guy in front of him isn't. So, do you understand what that means? We can all get together. Some people are upset because President Pence had a person calling himself a Messianic rabbi wearing a tallis, speaking and offering a prayer or something, and a lot of Jewish people were very offended by that, and rightfully so. But I want to point out their hypocrisy, because the fact of the matter is, what's the difference between one heresy and another? And there are different types of Messianic, people. They call themselves Messianic Jews. Some I would consider to be Christians, and some I would consider to be Jews. Mistaken, definitely mistaken. They're not they're not someone who I agree with, even theologically or ideologically, but there are certain groups that would call themselves Orthodox Messianics. They don't worship Jesus. They believe him to be Messiah, similar to the Lubavitcher. A lot of Lubavitchers believe Lubavitcher Rebbe was the Messiah. They're both wrong, but if they're keeping halacha, they are really, and they believe that we have to follow the halachas given, by Chazal, which is actually something that Jesus actually taught. He said in Matthew 28, I think it is, or 27, I don't remember exactly where it is, but Jesus said, heed the scribes and Pharisees, for they sit in the seat of Moses. He then went on to rebuke the Pharisees, which I'm sure all the Pharisees, they love to hear. If you study the history of this, I've made a lot of videos about this. We're not the Pharisees in the sense. The rabbis never called themselves the Pharisees. The Sadducees called the rabbis the Sadducees, but I'm saying we're not from the Sadducees. We're not from the Pharisee party. The Pharisees were, just basically people who were like OCD, really. Although the rabbis said there are authentic Pharisees, Parish Me'ahava, Parish Me'ira, but all the others they were all hypocrites and somewhat mentally ill. And the rabbis called them out on that, just like Jesus did, Lahavdil. But Jesus himself said that you have to follow the laws given by the scribe, that you have to listen to, you should do what they say and not what they do. That's what Jesus taught. And I've met people who call themselves Messianic Jews who believe that they are bound to keep halacha, and they don't worship Jesus. They look at him as a teacher and as some kind of a Messianic figure, which is ridiculous, and it's not part of our tradition any more than Philo. Philo is also not part of the Jewish tradition. We don't listen to the teachings of Philo, and we don't listen to the teachings of Jesus. But I'm saying, as a matter of religious devotion, we can be educated about what these other things are, but we wouldn't have known about Philo or Josephus if not for the church. These things were not preserved in our traditions. Which also lends to say that we can be suspect of what is actually said. So, I don't know how I got here. I don't mean physically. I know where I am. I'm almost to work, but I don't know how I got to this discussion. I don't even remember. I was making a video about freedom of the press, and I got to this. I was talking about that story with the. But anyway, that's So this story with. I mean, the fact of the matter is, we don't own this story of what happened, and that's also part of the issue. I mean, what happened in Pittsburgh was an attack on all Americans. And the people, Christians who call themselves Messianic Jews or who are Jews, it doesn't matter. I mean, most, Jews for Jesus, they're just regular Christians. They're basically just part of the Southern Baptist Convention, which is also okay. They are human beings and Americans just like us. And so when I say that a Messianic rabbi has just as much a right to call himself as a rabbi as a Reform rabbi or a conservative rabbi, they are heretics just the same. But we can still show respect to other people. Like my wife was telling me the other day, and she told me this before, and I'll put some background to this. In the Catholic Church, the Catholic Church recognizes other Christians as being Christian. They recognize other baptized Christians as being Christian if they recognize them as Christians. So most, so the Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox churches, the most of the Protestant churches, the Catholic Church accepts their baptism as being an authentic baptism. The Mormon Church, they don't. Why? Because Mormons are not Trinitarian. Mormons are polytheistic, really. However, whenever in the Mormon Church, the leader of the church, they call it prophet. Recently, a year or two ago, maybe less than a few months ago, I think, one of their leaders, they called a prophet, passed away. They get a new one. That's like their pope, So it's a big deal, to the Mormon Church. And in Salt Lake City, the Catholic cathedral there, when the funeral procession passes the Catholic cathedral, they ring their church bells. To show respect to this man who they don't believe to be a Christian. Right? But just to show respect. And fellowship and brotherhood of us as Americans and as human beings. Even though our religions are radically different. And so too, there is no need to be filled with hate against Messianic Jews any more than the Reform or the Conservative. And I don't hate the Reform and the Conservative Jews. Politically, I probably have more in common with a lot of the Messianic Jews. The Reform and the Conservative, the Conservative, religiously, we have a lot in common. We're probably like 99% on the same page, especially, it depends on which part of the conservative movement. But certainly the more conservative, traditional parts of the conservative movement are basically Orthodox. It's just not fully orthoprax, and even in their practice, they're 95, 99% orthoprax. Not having a mechitza, it's not the end of the world. It's nowhere in Shulchan Aruch you have to have a mechitza. It's a party line thing to a certain extent, which is valuable. We should preserve who we are, and I'm all for having mechitzas all the way up to the ceiling. But there's a time and a place for everything. What works in Curious Joel, what works in New Square, what works in Williamsburg or Borough Park, that's different than what works in other places. Each place has their own thing. So I don't hate the Reform and Conservative, and I don't hate the Messianics. But they're pretty much, the Reform and the Reconstructionists and the Messianic, they're not that different. The Conservative, they believe in the Yud Gimel Ikrim for the most part. Does it mean everybody who attends a conservative temple believes in it? No, but I'm just saying, most of the conservative rabbis, they believe, in the halacha and everything. It's not, most of the conservative rabbis I met are Shomer Shabbos. I know some who are not. And also, what does it mean, Shomer Shabbos, B'chal Shabbos? Is a grama really Chil Shabbos? Things like that. These are questions you could ask. They're not so pashut. They're not so simple that you can just automatically say so-and-so is breaking, is violating. There are certain people that are obvious. A person like George Soros, an atheist, and an enemy of the world, yeah, he is not part of Klal Yisrael, and there's nothing anti-Semitic about saying that George Soros is an evil man. It has nothing with him being Jewish. He's not acting Jewish, not acting very Jewish. The only people who think that it's anti-Semitic to hate George Soros are people who think that communism is a Jewish movement. It isn't. Communism is an anti-Jewish movement. He is a self-hating Jew. He is an anti-Semite. I mean, I don't like that term, anti-Semite. It racializes Jewish identity. It pretty much gives into Nazi ideology to say that, oh, we're a race as opposed to a religion, and really anybody from any race can convert to Judaism, and I would say just as much that people who leave Judaism lose it. They don't become Gentiles, but they lose a certain aspect of their Jewishness. They don't lose their total Jewishness. They can still marry someone Jewish, technically, although why would anyone want to? What it means is that halachically the kedushin is effective, but that's about it. That's really the only. But I usually would call them non-Gentiles. They're non-Jews and non-Gentiles. All right. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe. Comment. This whole concept of anti-Semitism that racializes Jewish identity it's a Nazi ideology. That's not a Jewish concept. Because look in Chazal, the Sadducees, it says, Bas Tzeduki in Hechzuk B'derech HaVisayim Hechzuk B'derech Yisrael. Meaning the Sadducees, the Chazal did not consider them part of the Jewish people. Until they repent. And the same thing, in Rambam, he talks about the children of the Karaites, if you can establish their lineage and so forth. But still, all that means is that they don't have to convert necessarily, although according to the Ramah, an apostate who comes back should have to go to the mikveh. And really, we should, probably make anyone who wasn't brought up in a frum environment, anybody who is not really, you can't really know that they're really, really Jewish, they should have to go to the mikveh. I think really, ideally, I mean, it's hard to force this, but anybody before they get married, man or woman, should have to go to the mikveh, so we know that they're really Jewish, in a certain sense. Well, thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe. Comment. I mean, I'm not really pushing that. I'm just saying theoretically, but all right. Thank you. God bless.